It was a brisk September afternoon in 2019, the kind of day where the quiet streets of Millfield, West Virginia, seemed untouched by time. The small mining town, nestled in the Appalachian foothills, thrived on simplicity. Everyone knew everyone, and the community shared an unspoken bond of familiarity. But beneath the peaceful facade, a storm was brewing that no one saw coming. Ethan Carter had no reason to expect anything unusual that day. He was a man of habit, a coal miner who lived for his family. With his wife, Laura, and their 7-year-old daughter, Sophia, he had carved out a modest life in this tightly knit town. Today, they were heading to return a weed trimmer borrowed from his best friend and co-worker, Ryan McAllister. Ryan had been like a brother to Ethan since the day they met at the Valley Ridge coal mine, and their bond had only grown stronger over the years. As they approached Ryan's home, a weathered wooden house at the edge of town, surrounded by dense trees, a sense of unease crept into the air. Laura noticed it first, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the silence. No sign of Ryan's old pickup truck in the driveway, no familiar sound of his dog barking. It was as if the house had gone dormant. Ethan knocked on the front door. Once. Twice. The hollow sound echoed, but no response came. He exchanged a glance with Laura, whose furrowed brow mirrored his own growing concern. "Maybe he's out back," Ethan said, his voice calm but tinged with uncertainty. Leading his family around the side of the house, he froze when he spotted the service door to the basement slightly ajar. A strange tension coiled in his chest. He reached out and pushed the door open with a creak that seemed louder than it should have been. "Ryan?" Ethan called into the dim interior. His voice was swallowed by the silence. The air inside the house was thick, stagnant, and wrong. Ethan stepped inside cautiously, urging Laura and Sophia to stay by the door. His boots crunched against broken glass scattered across the floor. A chair was overturned, and a mug lay shattered nearby, its dark contents staining the hardwood. These weren't the signs of a house left in haste, this was something else entirely. "I'll check downstairs," Ethan muttered, trying to mask the growing dread in his voice. The narrow staircase leading to the basement felt like a descent into something far darker than he could have imagined. Each step creaked under his weight as his pulse quickened. At the bottom of the stairs, the dim glow of a single light bulb illuminated a sight Ethan would never forget. Ryan McAllister lay motionless on the cold concrete floor, his lifeless eyes staring upward. Blood pooled around his head, glinting under the faint light like liquid shadows. Ethan stumbled back, his breath caught in his throat. "Laura! Call 911, he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Upstairs, Laura's trembling hands dialed as she clutched Sophia close. The dispatcher's calm voice on the other end felt distant, drowned out by her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Moments later, the faint sound of sirens broke through the oppressive silence. The peaceful town of Millfield would never be the same. Ryan's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was the catalyst for a web of secrets, betrayal, and lies that would unravel everything Ethan Carter had fought to protect. As the first responders arrived, Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing with questions. But one thought dominated them all: what happened here? Ethan Carter was the kind of man people in Millfield respected. A coal miner by trade, he was dependable and hardworking, someone who took pride in providing for his family. His life revolved around his wife, Laura, and their young daughter, Sophia. To the outside world, the Carters were a picture of stability in a town where life was often unpredictable. But Ethan carried a weight that no one could see. Beneath his stoic exterior lay a quiet desperation, a man caught in a web of conflicting emotions and impossible choices. It wasn't always this way. Ethan had met Laura back in August 2012, at the Bluebird Diner, a local haunt where she worked as a waitress. She was older than him by a few years, with 3 children from a previous marriage. Her life had been anything but easy. Laura was strong, determined, and fiercely independent, a survivor in every sense of the word. Ethan had been drawn to her immediately. There was something about the way she carried herself, her resilience, and her unyielding love for her children. Against the advice of friends who warned him about the challenges of raising another man's kids, Ethan pursued Laura relentlessly. In May 2013, they married in a small courthouse ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Ethan embraced Laura's children as his own, and a year later, they welcomed Sophia into their growing family. For a time, life was good. But as the years passed, cracks began to form. Ethan's work at the Valley Ridge coal mine was grueling, long hours in dangerous conditions, coupled with the constant threat of layoffs. The weight of responsibility, both financial and emotional, began to take its toll. Laura, ever perceptive, noticed the changes in him. He became quieter, more withdrawn. At first, she chalked it up to the pressures of his job, but deep down, she felt something more was at play. Then there was Ryan McAllister. Ethan had met Ryan in March 2016, during his training at the mine. Ryan was a seasoned miner, rough around the edges but with a heart that earned him respect among his peers. The two men bonded quickly. For Ethan, Ryan became more than just a mentor, he was a confidant, someone who understood the grind of the mines and the pressures of keeping a family afloat. They shared beers on the porch after long shifts, swapped stories about life, and leaned on each other in a way that felt more like brotherhood than friendship. But Ryan had his own burdens. A widower, he had lost his wife to cancer years earlier and raised his son alone until the boy moved to the city for work. Ryan's charm and camaraderie masked a deeper struggle, his identity as a gay man in a town that left little room for such openness. For years, he had kept this part of himself hidden, navigating the tightrope between authenticity and survival. In Ethan, Ryan found someone who seemed to share his sense of displacement. What began as friendship took a turn neither man anticipated. By June 2018, their relationship had become something more, a secret that Ethan guarded fiercely. For Ryan, it was a lifeline. For Ethan, a dangerous escape from a life that felt increasingly suffocating. Meanwhile, Laura's intuition told her something was wrong. Ethan's absences grew longer, his demeanor more distant. She tried to confront him, but he always had an excuse, a late shift, an extra job to make ends meet. Her trust in him wavered, but she buried her doubts for the sake of their family. As for Ryan, the secrecy began to wear on him. By August 2019, he was done hiding. He wanted Ethan to leave Laura, to live openly and freely. But Ethan refused. Torn between his love for his family and the connection he had with Ryan, Ethan became trapped in a cycle of guilt and fear. Ryan, feeling rejected and tired of the shadows, delivered an ultimatum: either you choose me, or I'll tell her. This ultimatum set everything into motion. Ryan's demand wasn't just a threat, it was a ticking time bomb. Ethan's world, carefully constructed and precariously balanced, was on the verge of collapse. And Laura, though still in the dark, could sense that the life she had fought so hard to build was beginning to crumble around her. The bonds between these three lives, Ethan, Laura, and Ryan, were growing tighter, suffocatingly so. What had once been a sanctuary of trust and friendship was now a battleground of secrets, betrayal, and impossible choices. The discovery of Ryan's body in his basement wasn't just a tragedy, it was the devastating result of years of hidden truths and unresolved conflicts. For Millfield, the quiet town that rarely made headlines, the shock of Ryan's death was only the beginning. For Ethan and Laura, it was the start of a nightmare that would expose everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the devastating cost of living a lie. The death of Ryan McAllister sent ripples through Millfield like a stone dropped into a still pond. What had seemed like a straightforward case of foul play quickly unraveled into something far more complex. For the townsfolk, Ryan was a friendly face, a hard worker who kept to himself. For Ethan Carter, however, Ryan's death was a shattering blow, one that would drag his carefully hidden secrets into the harsh light of scrutiny. The investigation began with the obvious questions. Who would want to kill Ryan McAllister? Why? And why did his house show signs of a struggle, yet nothing of value appeared to have been stolen? Detective Mark Callahan, a veteran of the county police force, led the inquiry. Known for his dogged determination, Callahan wasn't one to accept simple answers. His instincts told him there was more to Ryan's death than met the eye. At first, the detectives suspected a robbery gone wrong. The signs were there, a broken lamp, shattered glass on the floor. But the theory crumbled when they found Ryan's wallet untouched, cash and credit cards still inside. His expensive wristwatch lay undisturbed on a dresser upstairs. The more they combed through the house, the more it became clear, this wasn't about theft. It was personal. Callahan began piecing together Ryan's last known movements. Witnesses described him as cheerful in the days leading up to his death. There were no obvious enemies, no financial troubles, no signs of paranoia. However, one piece of information broke the case wide open, a conversation with Ryan's cousin, Emily McAllister. She came forward with a revelation that changed everything. Ryan was seeing someone, Emily told the detectives hesitantly. It was complicated. He said the man was married. He called him EJ. EJ? Callahan leaned forward, his mind already turning. Did he ever say who EJ was? Emily shook her head. No. He was careful about that. But he said it was getting harder to keep things quiet. He was going to give him an ultimatum, leave his wife, or he'd come clean. This was the break Callahan needed. EJ wasn't just a pseudonym, it was a clue, a breadcrumb leading straight to Ethan Carter. The detectives wasted no time digging into Ryan's phone records, cross-referencing texts, calls, and GPS data. What they uncovered was damning, hundreds of messages exchanged between Ryan and Ethan over the past year. Many of them were innocuous, but others hinted at something much deeper, something intimate. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Ethan Carter, the grieving friend who had found Ryan's body, was now a suspect. Callahan ordered a closer look at Ethan's alibi for the night of the murder. He claimed to have been home with Laura and Sophia, but surveillance footage told a different story. At 8:47 p.m., a camera from a nearby convenience store captured Ethan's truck turning onto Ryan Street. Confronted with the evidence, Ethan faltered. His calm demeanor cracked under the weight of Callahan's questions. He admitted to visiting Ryan that night but insisted it had nothing to do with the murder. He called me, Ethan said, his voice trembling. He was upset. He wanted to talk, to figure things out. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. What exactly happened, Ethan? Callahan pressed, his tone sharp. Why was there a struggle? Why is Ryan dead? Ethan's explanation was shaky at best. He described a heated argument, Ryan's frustration boiling over into threats. He said he'd tell Laura everything. He wouldn't listen to reason. I tried to leave, but he grabbed me. I didn't kill him. I swear. But the pieces didn't fit. Forensic evidence from the crime scene painted a different picture. The autopsy revealed 2 gunshot wounds to the back of Ryan's head, precise, execution style. There was no sign of a struggle on Ethan's body, no defensive wounds that matched his story. Meanwhile, Laura Carter began to suspect that her husband was hiding something. She had always trusted Ethan, but his erratic behavior in the days following Ryan's death was impossible to ignore. He was quieter than usual, avoiding eye contact, and his explanations felt rehearsed. One evening, as he sat staring blankly at the television, Laura made her decision. She began searching through Ethan's belongings. What she found was a collection of emails and messages between Ethan and Ryan, words of affection, plans for secret meetings, and promises that now rang hollow. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her husband had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. The tension escalated as Ethan's double life began to unravel. Ryan's ultimatum had been a ticking time bomb, and now, its detonation threatened to destroy everything. Laura, Ethan, and the entire town of Millfield were caught in the fallout of a web of lies and secrets too tangled to escape. And for Detective Callahan, the truth seemed closer than ever, though it was far darker than anyone could have anticipated. The death of Ryan McAllister didn't just expose a crime, it tore through the fragile fabric of the lives intertwined with his. At the heart of it all was Ethan Carter, a man whose seemingly ordinary existence hid layers of emotional turmoil and unspoken truths. To understand what had happened, the investigators, and everyone involved, needed to peel back the layers of his psyche. For most of his life, Ethan had played by the rules. Growing up in Millfield, he had learned early that survival meant fitting in, keeping your head down, and not asking for more than what life gave you. He married Laura because he loved her, but also because it was the right thing to do, a chance to build a family and be the kind of man his father had always taught him to be. But Ethan's inner world was a storm of contradictions. He was a dutiful husband, yet the weight of responsibility pressed on him like the mine walls where he spent his days. The relentless grind of work, bills, and fatherhood left him feeling like a shadow of himself. And then there was Ryan, someone who made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. What began as camaraderie evolved into something Ethan never expected: connection, intimacy, and the terrifying allure of freedom from the life he felt trapped in. Ethan loved his family. He adored Sophia's laughter, cherished Laura's resilience. But with Ryan, there was no need for pretense. Ethan could lay down the heavy mantle of husband and father and just be. This double life, though, was exhausting. The closer Ryan pushed for Ethan to make a choice, the harder it became for Ethan to reconcile the two halves of himself. The ultimatum Ryan issued was a breaking point. Ethan couldn't face losing his family or admitting to the world that he wasn't the man they thought he was. Ryan's death marked the end of a life lived in fragments. As a widower and single father, Ryan had built a reputation in Millfield as a hard worker and loyal friend. But under the surface, he carried the scars of a man who had spent years hiding his true self. Losing his wife to cancer had left him adrift, and when his son moved away to the city, the isolation became suffocating. Meeting Ethan felt like a lifeline. Here was someone who understood the same quiet desperation, someone who needed him as much as he needed them. But while Ryan found solace in their relationship, the secrecy became an unbearable weight. He was tired of hiding, tired of being someone's second life. The ultimatum he gave Ethan wasn't meant to destroy him, it was meant to force him to face the truth, to make a decision that would free them both. Ryan's intentions, however, were complicated by his own insecurities. Part of him wanted to believe that Ethan would choose him, that their bond was strong enough to withstand the consequences. But there was a darker part of Ryan, too, one that resented the power Ethan's indecision held over him. His frustration grew, turning their last encounter into a collision of emotions neither man could control. Laura was a fighter, always had been. She'd faced more than her share of struggles, from raising 3 children on her own to building a life with Ethan in the harsh realities of Millfield. But nothing could have prepared her for the betrayal she uncovered. Finding the messages between Ethan and Ryan was like stepping into a cold void, a place where the life she thought she knew dissolved into something unrecognizable. What hurt Laura the most wasn't just the affair, it was the years of deceit. She had poured everything into their marriage, sacrificed parts of herself to keep their family afloat, only to discover that Ethan had been living a double life. The guilt she had carried for doubting him was replaced by anger, and yet, underneath it all, there was still the love she had fought so hard to nurture. But how could she reconcile that love with the truth of who Ethan was? At the heart of this tragedy were the choices, big and small, that each character made. Ethan's decision to hide his relationship with Ryan stemmed from fear of rejection, fear of judgment, and fear of losing the life he had built. Ryan's decision to push Ethan for more was born from a need for validation and a desire to reclaim his own identity. Laura's suspicions and eventual confrontation were driven by a mix of self-preservation and the need to protect her family. When these motivations collided, the results were catastrophic. Ryan's demand for honesty pushed Ethan to the edge, and Ethan's inability to choose left Ryan feeling betrayed. The confrontation in Ryan's basement was not premeditated murder, but it was the culmination of years of hidden truths and suppressed emotions. Ethan didn't set out to kill Ryan, but in that moment, his fear overtook him. He saw no way out, no way to reconcile the man he wanted to be with the man the world expected him to be. For Laura, the aftermath was a battle between anger and resilience. She had to pick up the pieces of her shattered life while grappling with the knowledge that the man she loved was capable of both profound love and devastating betrayal. This story wasn't just about a murder, it was about the weight of secrets, the cost of denial, and the human heart's fragile capacity to bear it all. Detective Mark Callahan had seen his share of homicides in his 20 years on the force, but Ryan McAllister's murder was different. From the moment he stepped into the basement and saw Ryan's lifeless body, it was clear that this wasn't a random act of violence. Everything about the scene felt calculated, deliberate, and personal. What Callahan didn't know was just how tangled and dark this case would become. The investigation began methodically. The signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, broken glass, and Ryan's blood pooled on the floor, pointed to an altercation. Yet, as Callahan's team combed through the house, it became clear that this wasn't a robbery. Valuables remained untouched, a wallet full of cash, an expensive watch, and even a rare coin collection. This wasn't about money, Callahan muttered to his team. Someone came here for him. As forensic experts scoured the crime scene, Callahan turned his attention to Ryan's personal life. Emily McAllister, Ryan's cousin, was among the first to be interviewed. She provided an unexpected lead. Ryan had been involved in a secret relationship with a married man he referred to only as EJ. She admitted she didn't know EJ's true identity but disclosed that Ryan had grown increasingly frustrated and planned to confront EJ the night before his murder. The revelation shifted the investigation into high gear. Callahan ordered a review of Ryan's phone records, text messages, and emails. What they found was the first real twist in the case: dozens of exchanges between Ryan and a contact labeled simply as D. The messages were personal, intimate, and, at times, volatile. One text stood out: "I can't keep living like this. It's either me or her. You need to decide." Detectives began piecing together a profile of D. The phone number linked back to Ethan Carter. At first, Callahan hesitated. Ethan was the man who had found Ryan's body and seemed genuinely distraught. But the evidence told a different story. Surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store showed Ethan's truck driving toward Ryan's house at 8:47 p.m. on the night of the murder. The footage, combined with Ethan's phone's GPS data, placed him at the scene. When questioned, Ethan initially denied everything. He claimed he had been home with his wife, Laura, and their daughter, Sophia, watching television. But as Callahan laid out the evidence, the texts, the GPS data, and the footage, Ethan's composure began to crack. "I went to talk to him," Ethan finally admitted. "He was upset. I just wanted to calm him down." "Calm him down?" Callahan's voice was sharp. "Ethan, Ryan wasn't just upset. He was killed, 2 bullets to the back of the head. That doesn't sound like a calm conversation to me." Ethan's explanation was shaky. He described an argument that escalated. "He threatened to tell Laura," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know what to do. I panicked, but I didn't kill him. I swear." Meanwhile, Laura Carter's world was unraveling. She had noticed Ethan's odd behavior in the days following Ryan's death, his distracted demeanor, his reluctance to talk about what happened. Her suspicions grew when she found Ethan's phone, where she discovered messages between him and Ryan. Words of affection and plans for secret meetings were enough to confirm what she feared most: her husband had been unfaithful, and not just in the way she imagined. Laura went to the police with the messages. "I don't know what's happening," she told Callahan, her voice shaking. "But Ethan's hiding something." With this new evidence, Callahan ordered a deeper dive into Ethan's life. Forensic analysis revealed a startling discovery: gunshot residue on Ethan's clothing, which contradicted his claim that he hadn't been involved in the murder. And then came the second twist: the murder weapon, a small-caliber handgun, was recovered from a creek near Ryan's house. Ballistics matched it to the bullets that killed Ryan, and fingerprints on the weapon matched Ethan's. The case against Ethan was growing stronger, but Callahan wasn't ready to declare it solved. Something about Ethan's demeanor nagged at him. Was he lying to cover up a moment of rage? Or was there more to the story? As the evidence mounted, Ethan's version of events became harder to believe, yet Callahan couldn't shake the feeling that there was another layer to this crime waiting to be uncovered. The third twist came when Callahan revisited Emily McAllister. During a second interview, she revealed something she hadn't shared before: Ryan had written a letter to EJ, a final attempt to force him to make a decision. The letter was found among Ryan's belongings and contained chilling words: "If I can't have you, no one will." The discovery cast new light on Ryan's state of mind in the days leading up to his death. Was Ryan's desperation the catalyst for the confrontation? Did Ethan kill Ryan in a fit of fear and panic? Or was there someone else involved, someone who had yet to come into focus? As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the case against Ethan seemed clear, yet Callahan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The twists in the investigation had brought them closer to the truth, but the full picture remained elusive. The town of Millfield braced for answers, not knowing that the truth would be far darker than they imagined. The courtroom in Greenbrier County was packed. The trial of Ethan Carter had become the talk of Millfield and beyond, captivating everyone with its shocking revelations and complex emotions. From the start, the prosecution and defense painted vastly different pictures of the events leading up to Ryan McAllister's death. The truth, as it unraveled in front of the jury, was far darker and more tangled than anyone could have anticipated. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Claire Morrison, presented a chilling narrative. Ethan Carter, they argued, was a man living a double life: loving father and husband by day, secret lover by night. When Ryan McAllister, his longtime friend and confidant, demanded Ethan choose between his family and their relationship, Ethan's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Desperate to protect his image and family, Ethan silenced Ryan in cold blood. Morrison's case was bolstered by the overwhelming forensic evidence. The gunshot residue on Ethan's clothing, the surveillance footage placing him at Ryan's house, and the murder weapon with his fingerprints all painted a damning picture. Ballistics confirmed that Ryan had been shot twice in the back of the head, a deliberate, execution-style killing. This wasn't a crime of passion, Morrison told the jury during her opening statement. This was calculated. Ethan Carter didn't just kill Ryan McAllister, he executed him to protect a web of lies. The defense, led by James Rowland, faced an uphill battle. Rowland argued that Ethan wasn't a killer but a man pushed to his breaking point by impossible circumstances. The defense admitted that Ethan had been at Ryan's house that night, but they claimed the situation had escalated unexpectedly. According to Ethan's testimony, Ryan had threatened to expose their relationship to Laura, becoming physically aggressive when Ethan tried to leave. "I was scared," Ethan told the court, his voice trembling as he recounted the confrontation. "Ryan wouldn't let me go. He said he'd destroy my life. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Rowland's strategy hinged on casting doubt on Ethan's intent. He argued that the gunshot wounds, while horrific, didn't prove premeditation. "My client is guilty of many things," Rowland said, "but he is not a murderer." This was a tragic accident born of fear and desperation. But as the trial progressed, Ethan's story began to unravel. Morrison dismantled his claims of self-defense piece by piece. The forensic evidence didn't align with Ethan's account. There were no defensive wounds on his body, no signs of a struggle on Ryan's. The precise angle of the gunshots, both to the back of the head, was impossible to reconcile with Ethan's version of events. The prosecution called Laura Carter to the stand, a move that added emotional weight to their case. Laura's testimony was devastating. She spoke of her growing suspicions, the messages she had found on Ethan's phone, and the betrayal she felt upon discovering the truth. "When I found those messages," Laura said, her voice breaking, "I thought I'd lost the man I married. But then I realized. I never really knew him." The courtroom fell silent as Laura's words hung in the air. For the jury, her testimony wasn't just about the evidence, it was a window into the human cost of Ethan's lies. The turning point came when the prosecution introduced the letter Ryan had written to Ethan, discovered among his belongings. In the letter, Ryan pleaded with Ethan to make a choice, but his words carried a menacing undertone. "If you walk away from this, you'll regret it. I won't let you destroy me like this." The letter cast doubt on Ethan's claims of self-defense. It suggested a confrontation was inevitable, but it also hinted at Ryan's own desperation. The prosecution argued that Ethan had preemptively silenced Ryan to protect his family, while the defense tried to frame the letter as evidence of Ryan's volatility. By the time closing arguments began, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Morrison delivered a final, searing indictment of Ethan's actions. "He had a choice," she said, her voice steady but forceful. "Ethan Carter could have walked away. He could have faced the consequences of his actions like an honest man. Instead, he chose to kill. And for that choice, there must be justice." Rowland, in his closing statement, appealed to the jury's sense of empathy. "Ethan Carter is not a perfect man," he admitted. "But he is not a monster. He is a husband, a father, a man who made mistakes, but mistakes don't make a murderer. What happened that night was a tragedy, but it wasn't premeditated." The jury deliberated for 2 days. Each hour felt like an eternity for Ethan, who sat in his cell replaying the events of that night over and over again. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom braced for the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreperson began, "We find the defendant, Ethan Carter, guilty." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. His head dropped into his hands as gasps echoed through the room. Laura sat in the gallery, her face a mask of pain and disbelief. The judge sentenced Ethan to life in prison without the possibility of parole, citing the calculated nature of the crime and its devastating impact. As Ethan was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom felt heavier, as if the weight of the truth had drained the air from the room. The trial had brought answers, but it left no sense of resolution, only shattered lives and lingering questions. For the town of Millfield, the trial wasn't just about justice for Ryan McAllister. It was a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of secrets, lies, and choices made in fear. The verdict marked the end of the trial but not the end of the pain. For the town of Millfield, Ethan Carter's conviction closed a chapter of uncertainty, but it left behind scars that would take years to heal. The ripples of Ryan McAllister's death, Ethan's betrayal, and Laura's heartbreak reached far beyond the courtroom, forcing everyone involved to grapple with the consequences of the choices that had led to this tragedy. Inside the stark walls of a maximum security prison, Ethan faced the reality of what he had done. Stripped of his family, his freedom, and the carefully constructed life he had fought to maintain, he was left alone with his thoughts, and his guilt. Every day was a reminder of the choices that had brought him to this point. The affair with Ryan, which had once seemed like an escape from his mundane existence, had destroyed everything he held dear. He thought of Sophia, the daughter who had once run to greet him at the door after long shifts, and how he would never again feel her tiny arms around him. He thought of Laura, the woman who had believed in him, trusted him, and sacrificed so much for their family. Ethan replayed the events of that fateful night over and over in his mind, searching for a way he could have stopped the chain of events from unraveling so catastrophically. He thought about the moment Ryan had confronted him, the ultimatum, the fear that had gripped him. But no amount of regret could change what had happened. Ryan was gone, and Ethan had pulled the trigger. Yet, as months turned into years, Ethan found himself grappling not just with regret, but with a deeper understanding of himself. He began attending counseling sessions in prison, where he confronted the years of denial that had led to his double life. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he had been too afraid to face the truth, about his feelings, about his life, and about the harm his choices had caused. It was a painful reckoning, but it was also the first step toward accepting the person he had been too scared to be. For Laura, the aftermath was equally devastating but marked by a different kind of resilience. In the weeks following Ethan's sentencing, she struggled to comprehend the betrayal and the loss of the man she thought she knew. The discovery of his affair had shattered her trust, but the murder, and the cold, deliberate nature of it, left her questioning everything about their life together. At first, Laura felt paralyzed by grief and anger. She couldn't reconcile the Ethan who had played with Sophia on the living room floor with the man who had killed Ryan in cold blood. Her mind churned with questions that had no answers. Had there been signs? Could I have stopped this? Was any of it real? But Laura knew she couldn't afford to fall apart. Sophia needed her, and the older children, though grown, leaned on her for guidance as they processed the loss of the stepfather they had once admired. Slowly, Laura began to rebuild. She threw herself into her work, leaned on friends and family, and sought therapy to navigate the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Through the pain, Laura found strength she didn't know she had. She realized that while Ethan's betrayal had destroyed their marriage, it didn't define her. She was more than just a victim of his lies, she was a survivor. And for Sophia, she became a beacon of stability, teaching her daughter that even in the face of heartbreak, life could be rebuilt. At 7 years old, Sophia didn't fully understand the complexities of what had happened. She only knew that her father was gone and that her mother cried more than usual. As she grew older, Laura made the difficult decision to share the truth with her in stages, ensuring that Sophia understood Ethan's actions without letting them define her memories of him. For Sophia, the experience shaped her understanding of love, trust, and forgiveness. She carried the lessons her mother taught her, that honesty is paramount and that strength comes from facing the truth, no matter how painful. For the town of Millfield, the tragedy was a wake-up call. Ryan McAllister's death exposed the quiet intolerance that had forced him to live in secrecy. Conversations about acceptance and understanding began to emerge, though change came slowly. For some, Ryan's story was a reminder of the dangers of hiding who you are. For others, it underscored the cost of betrayal and fear. At its core, the story of Ethan, Laura, and Ryan was one of choices made out of fear, desperation, and love, and the far-reaching consequences they carried. From their tragedy, several lessons emerged. 1. The cost of secrets. Ethan's downfall stemmed from his inability to confront the truth. His fear of judgment and rejection led him to hide his relationship with Ryan, creating a web of lies that ultimately destroyed everyone involved. The lesson was clear: secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, have the power to unravel lives. 2. The importance of acceptance. Ryan's struggle for acceptance, both from others and from himself, highlighted the devastating impact of societal intolerance. His death served as a stark reminder of the need for communities to foster understanding and compassion. 3. Resilience in the face of betrayal. Laura's journey showed the strength of the human spirit. Despite the betrayal and loss, she found a way to rebuild her life, becoming an example of courage and perseverance for her children and her community. 4. Facing the truth. For Ethan, the ultimate lesson was one of accountability. His refusal to face his feelings, his choices, and their consequences led to tragedy. His story was a cautionary tale about the importance of honesty, with oneself and with others. In the end, the story of Ryan McAllister's death and Ethan Carter's fall wasn't just about a crime, it was about humanity. It was about the choices we make, the truths we fear, and the resilience it takes to rebuild after everything falls apart. And for those left behind, it was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a path forward. The quiet of Millfield, West Virginia, had returned, but it was not the same silence as before. The town, once defined by its simplicity and close-knit community, now carried the weight of a tragedy that left no one untouched. The echoes of Ryan McAllister's death, Ethan Carter's conviction, and Laura Carter's resilience lingered in every whispered conversation, every cautious glance. But for those most directly affected, life moved forward, though it would never be the same. Standing on the porch of her modest home, Laura watched as Sophia played in the yard, her laughter breaking through the crisp autumn air. It had been over a year since the trial, but for Laura, the pain of betrayal and loss still simmered beneath the surface. Yet, she had found a way to channel that pain into strength. The home she once shared with Ethan had been transformed into a sanctuary for herself and her children. Every photo of Ethan had been packed away, not out of hatred but as a way to create space for healing. Laura worked tirelessly to ensure that Sophia, now 8, grew up with the support and love she needed to process the absence of her father. Laura had also found a sense of purpose in the aftermath. She began speaking at community events, advocating for open conversations about mental health, identity, and the importance of honesty in relationships. Her words resonated with many in Millfield, especially those who had quietly struggled with similar fears and secrets. Still, on quiet nights, Laura often sat alone on that porch, wondering how things could have been different. What if Ethan had trusted her enough to share the truth? What if Ryan had felt safe enough to live openly? What if the choices they had all made hadn't collided so tragically? These questions lingered, unanswered but ever present. Ethan sat in his cell, the clang of prison doors and distant voices his constant companions. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, yet the weight of what he had done remained sharp and unrelenting. He thought often of Laura and Sophia, wondering if they would ever forgive him, or if he deserved forgiveness at all. In the quiet hours, Ethan filled notebooks with letters he'd never send, each one a mixture of apology and explanation. He wrote to Laura about the love he still held for her, to Sophia about the hope he had for her future, and to Ryan, grappling with the guilt of taking a life he once cared for deeply. Ethan's letters weren't just for them, they were for himself, an attempt to untangle the web of emotions and choices that had brought him here. Slowly, he began to see the truth he had spent years avoiding: his fear had destroyed the people he loved most. And though he couldn't undo what had happened, he resolved to use whatever time he had left to confront the man he had been and the man he wanted to become. For Millfield, the story of Ethan and Ryan became a symbol of the cost of secrets and intolerance. Conversations about acceptance and mental health began to take root, albeit slowly. Some residents looked inward, questioning their own roles in fostering an environment where Ryan had felt so isolated. Others continued to cling to old ways, unwilling to face the discomfort of change. But there were glimmers of hope. At the local diner where Ethan and Laura had first met, a small group formed to support LGBTQ+ individuals and their allies, offering a safe space in a town that had long been silent on such matters. Emily McAllister, Ryan's cousin, became one of its most vocal advocates, determined to honor her cousin's memory by ensuring others wouldn't have to live in the shadows. The story of Ethan, Laura, and Ryan wasn't just about tragedy, it was about the choices we make and the consequences they carry. It was about love, fear, and the devastating impact of secrets. But it was also about resilience, the capacity to rebuild, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. As Laura stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The pain was still there, but so was a sense of possibility. Life wasn't what she had imagined, but it was hers to rebuild, piece by piece. For Ethan, confined within the walls of his prison, the future was less certain. Yet, in his notebooks and his heart, there was a flicker of hope that his story might serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the truth, no matter how difficult, is always the better choice. And for Millfield, the future remained unwritten, shaped by the lessons learned and the choices yet to be made. What would you have done if you were Ethan, Laura, or Ryan? Do you think Ethan's actions were driven by fear, love, or selfishness? Could this tragedy have been avoided if the characters had been more honest with themselves and each other? What lessons do you take away from this story about the power of secrets and the cost of living a double life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales of crime, betrayal, and redemption. Your voice matters. Join the conversation today.